Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat Series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Caligeras for Pragmatic Institute and your host for this episode. Today, I'm really excited about our guests and our topic. But before we kind of dive into that, I just kind of want to set the stage. So I have the distinct pleasure of not only getting to interview a bunch of people on this show, but I also get to talk to our listeners all the time. And I think when I think about what the listeners are like, product managers are like, product marketers, it is a bunch of type A people, a bunch of problem solvers, right? We have no shortage of ideas, none. We have frustration sometimes though, in how do we make those ideas a reality, right? How do we actually make things happen? If you have a great backlog, you've got a great list of things to do, but like there isn't the progress you want to see. And it's so frustrating, right? And it's sometimes it's resources, but sometimes it's just, it feels like you can see the answer and getting other people to understand that and to like follow along is just not working. And so because I understand this problem, that's what we're going to dig in today. And I've had the pleasure and honor of working with the two women who we're going to talk with today several times. I very much admire them. Whenever I talk to them, they both impress and inspire. And so I'm really excited to have on Shannon Lucas and Tracey Lovejoy, who are the co-founders and CEOs of Catalyst Constellations. Welcome, Shannon and Tracey.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, to join me.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, it is a pleasure. Okay. So I always like to start with origin stories, right? Sort of like, how did you get where you are today? And why are you guys so passionate about what it is that you do?
Ooh, I love that second part. That's so exciting.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I'll definitely jump in. My background, kind of the most relevant moment of story, I was training as a researcher, thought I was going to be a cultural anthropologist, didn't love the academic world, and took a surprising turn directly into tech. So directly out of graduate school, I started working at Microsoft, where I spent over a decade working specifically in research because I was studying as a researcher, but working with interdisciplinary teams, including product managers and marketing teams, to really help understand what was it that customers needed, to look around the corners, to think about the opportunity and the innovation in product development. While I was there, I loved growing as a leader. I would geek out on, all the opportunities that Microsoft had and gave us to grow. And one of the things I did is I took a coaching class thinking that would grow me as a leader, and it did. But it was also really disruptive because it was the first time I had a sense of calling. If anyone in the audience has kind of had that moment, it was my very first. So I continued to work at Microsoft because that was not part of the plan to go be this other thing. I knew what I was doing, focused in product innovation and product work, but I couldn't in good conscience not listen to what my body was feeling. So after 3 years, I hung a shingle, went out and began to work in leadership development, executive coaching, and supporting teams in the world. But at first, I did not know who I wanted to support. And so I used my research skills to investigate different populations. Do I want to support small business owners or like female leaders in technology, or, what was it? What I found is that there was not an existing population out there that every time I went and did a set of interviews that I thought that's the one. Instead, what I found is I did an analysis across clients. At that point, I'd been coaching for 5 years. And I saw these attributes across them that I had never named as a category before. Things like those who would show up and had these big, crazy dreams to how to make the world better that maybe they were a little scared to say out loud, but deeply excited. And we would talk about it. And the next time they came back, they had leapt forward and made incredible progress. So I went to the literature shelves to say, okay, there's so much written about innovation. Where can I go learn about these people who really seem to be on that front end? Where are the fire starters? This was in 2015, and there was close to nothing on the shelves that really talked about the individuals who were the sparks. There was all kinds of processes that we all use in tech and have for a long time. Agile was, really ingrained at that point, for example. So I was like, well, I'm a researcher. And so I started doing really systematic research to understand folks. While I was doing that work, one of my favorite clients at the time definitely fit the profile. And that was the amazing Shannon Lucas. And so getting to the why are we so passionate, I'm going to hand it off to her because she can take the story from here.
So part of Tracey's research was sitting down with the clients that she loved working with and starting to build that piece of knowledge. And so I remember like where I was sitting the day that she interviewed me, because that passion is so real. And it was like at the end of the interview, she started explaining, well, this is what I've been seeing. What do you think about that? And she already had the term catalyst at that point, but it was like getting hit by a bolt of lightning. I was like, oh my God, the things that you just described about that population don't just describe me now or in my relationship with my job. I can look all the way back to high school, starting the recycling program in high school. And like now there's this silver thread that connects so many dots that weren't explainable before. Where I was working when Tracey, when we had that conversation was at Vodafone. I'll just say briefly, my background, I was an art history major. I quickly became a network engineer, as one did in the late 90s, especially living in Seattle. So I also worked at Microsoft for a year. Did the .com thing, started a couple of companies of my own, went back into the corporate world. And I really loved moving from being a network engineer into being able to engage with the customers. And what I realized after a few years of doing that was the customers don't even understand what the art of the possible is in terms of how to leverage. I mean, mobile telephony can revolutionize anything in the world.
Right.
So we were trying to help them understand how to take that product set and transform their business. And so I got tapped as basically already running innovation workshops at Vodafone and got tapped to help build out their enterprise innovation program. The hypothesis that we had that I loved, and again, going back to the passion part, was we didn't want to be an ivory tower of innovation. I was working in Silicon Valley. There was one person at HQ and three of us in Silicon Valley. But we're like, we want to find those fire starters around the world. We're like, we call them positive troublemakers. We'll connect them. We'll create a shared language. We'll help them stop reinventing the wheel from Ghana to Kenya to India to Turkey. And then they'll know the other fire starters in the region. And so we'll build this like culture of innovation by connecting the dots. Fast forward 3 years, and this is when I started working with Tracey, we were wildly successful. And I was really, I was naive about the success because now we know as a catalyst, I could always see the more impact that we could have been doing. But we were generating tens of millions of in-year revenue, hundreds of millions in pipeline, getting product out to market, like you name it, we were successful. It wasn't innovation theater, but I was burning out. And I was burning out because at that point, the Innovation Champion program had grown from sort of that ragtag group of 8 positive troublemakers to this very structured Innovation Champion program. It was gamified. There were 5 levels. We had CEO support. We did training, like all of the things. And the problem that I was most obsessed with solving was no matter how big that Innovation Champion pool grew, it was always a subset of people who were showing up like I would, which is just like moving, like we would have to get in front of them to remove the barriers for them. I didn't have to cajole them into doing something. And so I was feeling like a failure because I was like, well, I'm succeeding over here at activating these people, but I'm failing at like 70%. So my friend was like, why don't you hire an exec coach? And I was like, that's a great idea. And so again, the bolt of lightning was like, look, this exactly describes now. If I could just find the other 30% and double that and know that they're be able to identify them as catalysts, we could 10x, 100x our impact. Interestingly, at the same time, because it's so lonely and hard to be a catalyst executive in the corporate world, I had handpicked a group of people from around the world that I thought were like me. And I was like, let's just co-create a community. I didn't need to run another community. That was my day job. But the exact same thing was playing out there. It was like, yeah, my hit rate was probably even a little higher, but it was still not like all of the people. But I said to Tracey, I said, I have this group. I called it the global entrepreneur salon because they didn't have another word at the time. It wasn't just innovators, right? But I said, they're also burning out, a bunch of them. So let's do a retreat. It was in my plans. Hot tub, good wine, Northern California, good food, recharge, learn together. And I said, do you want to do that with me? And she's like, yes, that's what the research says those people need. So that was the birth of the company. I stayed in the corporate world for a couple more years and moved over to Cisco's Hyper Innovation Living Lab and led Horizon 3 innovation, ecosystem innovation there, activated their sort of initial blockchain activities there, was recruited to Ericsson as executive vice president for emerging business. In 2020, on our vision, our action map was to write a book and come together. So we wrote a book in 2020, which you can see behind Tracey, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burnout. Happened to be a great year to write a book. And now we are passionate about supporting Catalyst executives and organizations to identify, activate, and empower their catalyst.
That's right.
Now that is an origin story, right? I mean, that's great. So I mean, there's so much there. They're so funny. There's so many people in product who are like, I started on this path and I ended up here. And right, like you guys both have that aspect of your place, and the idea of positive troublemakers, right? The idea of the ones who kind of they stick in the craw. They make the wheels stop a little bit, but for positive pieces. I think we often can feel that way in a meeting, and you're just like, and you can see other people getting frustrated sometimes. And because we also know the unpositive troublemakers who do that same thing just to make everything grind to a halt. So I think the idea that you guys have that there is a persona is not the right word, but there is a group of people. And as you said, Tracey, they don't belong in a title or a gender or an industry or a geography. It cuts across, right? It's segmentation done differently. Thinking about these are the problems they're really good at solving, and here's the problems they have, right? And for you to be able to identify that cross cut, and really start to go, okay, what are these cross cuts? Because as Shannon says, if I can get people of this same cloth together, my impact is huge, right? And one of the other things, and we'll talk about this too, is like going a little bit deeper about where in organizations sometimes these catalysts, these positive troublemakers are found can be surprising for people, right? I don't think it'll be surprising that they're sometimes found in product management, right? Or design. Like there's some places where it feels like, yep. But the places that you've seen them and the power that you have of activating them is really, really impressive. So let's dig in a little bit more. So we're talking about how, the idea is how do you make a bigger impact? How do you get that 10x impact? So let's talk a little bit about what is it that makes these transformations successful, Shannon?
Obviously, hearing the origin story, I'm going to start with finding your catalyst. So if we think about how a lot of the management consulting companies try and help organizations create change, there's kind of like a transformation playbook. And sure, there may have been success, but they kind of treat it as a one size fits all. And change and our relationship to change is deeply personal. And so you can hand a playbook to one person, they're like, yes, I'm going to take that and I'm going to make it better. And you could hand it to another person, they're like, yeah, thanks, and bury it under the pile of papers on their desk, right? So if you're facing a big transformation, the very first thing to do, if you think of a normal distribution curve of relationship to change, the catalyst will be the sharp end of the stick. So obviously, we deeply believe that the first thing to do is identify your catalyst. As a side note, when we work with organizations to identify their catalysts, one of the things that we do is what we call like a high impact cultural assessment. Because just because you're a catalyst does not mean you're going to be super successful in any given organization. And so, these are sort of, opposite ends of a spectrum for a purpose, but, you could be a lone wolf at Google and in the 20% days, create something like Gmail in your 20% time and have it be wildly successful, even if you had no network. I worked at a very old Swedish company where consensus and collaboration was critical to getting anything done. One's not inherently better or worse than the other, but you need to know what those cultural attributes are and then find the catalyst and identify the catalysts who, are most aligned to that cultural profile. So that's the first thing. And then, being really clear on your vision, your purpose, and having a strategy so that when you start to activate your catalyst, this sort of hidden talent across your company, that they deeply understand what the guardrails are, because catalysts are definitely in your organization and they are trying to create change. You talked about the squeaky wheel. What happens with catalysts is they can be the not positive troublemakers, not because they're trying to cause friction, but because they're not aligned with it. They don't have the self-knowledge. There's a lot of things that we can talk about there. So making sure that you align them to the strategy and keep those guardrails, but keep enough space to let them do what they do really well, which is the sensing across the company, the ecosystem, the culture, and bring that back as this really virtuous, positive spiral. Because no longer are the days of like, here's our transformation strategy for the next 5 years, go. Right? It's like, hey, we tried that. Customer said this, pivot and come back. And that's what catalysts are really, really great at.
I think
the other thing
that
I
was going to add that I think the idea of giving guardrails is super important in transformation, not just for Catalyst, but as an organization. Too bad it's like, we need to be more innovative and and you're like, what? So I bring innovation, but it's not what you mean, because I don't understand where you're trying to go as a business, or I don't understand the limitations of the investment, or what your comfortable is with risk and reward, right? So those kind of guardrails are important in a business. But if you've got someone supercharged, right? If we're saying, yes, that's true for everybody, and this one's like trying to go 10 times, the speed at which they can get off track without the guide rails, like the speed at which they can veer really far to the left is really, really fast. Yeah.
And they're so good intentioned, right? Like there's very few really, challenging people that you're like, no, don't do that thing. They're well intentioned. So just giving them that little bit of space. In terms of transformation too, I think, being really close to the customer, if we're just taking a step back of transformation writ large, and catalysts are really, you talked about it. We often end up in design roles or innovation roles or places where it's like, ooh, what are the people saying? And then I think also this helps keep them on track, but it's really like, take a small step, get the data, see what you learned, and bring that back. And that's true for the Catalyst and the whole organization. One more piece I'll say. One more piece I'll say is for transformation, if we go back to the change curve, certainly activating your Catalyst, regardless of like if you're the person who's involved in leading the transformation Catalyst or not, thinking really strategically about who is where on the change curve and how you're going to engage them when. Right? So we're not going to go to the laggards and get them on board first. We only have so much time as leaders or a team to engage the rest of the organization. So being really intentional about who's on that network map of yours, who's a resistor, who's a supporter, when you're going to engage them, and what you want them to do on that journey.
It makes a ton of sense. Okay. So we're going to go for the tip of the sword, right? We're going to talk about the catalyst, the positive troublemakers. And I think positive troublemakers does give you a good idea, but give me just like the high level definition of a catalyst. If you were like, here are these traits that I think of as a catalyst.
The highest level, people who see a lot of possibilities to make the world around them better, and they cannot stop themselves from moving into action. That is
not just see the idea. It's just like, I've got to fix this.
100%. And often before they can even articulate for themselves what they're fixing, they have begun to take action toward it. And that's one of the places that we bring a lot of awareness to catalysts, because that lack of awareness and intentionality ends up getting us in a lot of trouble in a lot of different ways. So we can break down those attributes that sit behind it, but that is the highest level.
And I think one of the things you guys talk about a lot is like someone who can see a lot of different data points and sort of synthesize it. And they're like,
That's
okay,
exactly
go.
Exactly right. So
and I think it's the same problem. You forget to communicate that, right? Like it made so much sense to you. You just saw it and we're like, obviously the answer is 4. Okay.
100%.
And so you're gone and everyone's like, what is happening?
And so you're pointing on those specific attributes, because number one is people, and Shannon used the word sensing, people who are able to take in information at really incredibly rapid speeds from a lot of different sources simultaneously and have that information connect into a vision, even if not formally articulated. So to your point, this gets talked about as systems thinking, as dot connecting, as lateral thinking, right? There's the people who are just kind of out there seeing what doesn't exist yet. So they have this vision, and it's a vision of how the world can be better. That's, this really unique element is there's a lot of people that can put things together, but they aren't necessarily doing that forward casting to seeing a different future. And so then these folks are also beginning to think about, so what does it take to get there? And their bodies are following, right, the vision and truly beginning to have conversations and taking steps. And then a key element is that as they begin to do that, they are intuitively often iterating as they move forward. So our, product management community, they're going to be really, whether or not their organizations use Agile or not, they're going to understand this idea of iteration. So whether you are trained in design thinking, in Agile, in the scientific method, we see this very innate behavior in catalysts where they go out in the world and they take a step and they learn from it, because remember, they're still the sensors. They're still taking in all the information. And so they are quickly changing the steps that they'll take, and sometimes even the vision itself, as they're moving forward.
So you can see, as you describe this, both like how powerful that is, but also let's pretend you're just the person standing next to the catalyst, a very good person, right? A really hard, smart, working person. Like this person the catalyst is going through 50 different iterations and changes. And like, you have no idea any of that happened. Right. And this is where we talk about the tension.
So painful. It's so painful. Like when I was a leader, in the organizational context, and I would like set someone out on a mission to go bring me something on by Friday. Right. And I would have iterated in my, and to Tracey's point, it's like, there's this unconsciousness to the fact that we're doing it. It's just like in our bodies.
Right.
And then they'd come back and I'm sure they were delivering me exactly what I asked for.
But it doesn't make any sense to you right now. You're like,
yeah, I'm like, that's not what I asked for. It's so painful, Rebecca.
And it's right. And then that's why I think like it is 100% a superpower and a kryptonite all in one if you don't use it right.
Absolutely.
So first is knowing that first is admitting the more you know, it's admitting you have a problem. Be like, hi, my name's Rebecca. I'm a catalyst. And right. Like
100%. Shannon said
you have to be aware.
You do the sense making, you backward cast your whole life in this way. It is not uncommon that we get emails of like, I read about it, I heard about it, and I cried, right? Because you're exactly right. Like positive troublemaker is just the flip side of the coin of being not a positive troublemaker, right? A disruptive, not wanted troublemaker. And so we hold those experiences in our body, and to keep going because it's just who we are, we have to just kind of sublimate the difficulty that we've experienced or the feeling of judgment or not being wanted or even being gaslit and fired, which is not unusual for catalysts before we really have this awareness. And so you hear about it and what we hear is, I'm not weird. I'm not alone. I'm not broken. There's a way to name how I am. Like it's a deeply personal and moving moment for people to have this way to see themselves.
Yeah. We have one leader who once he understood that, he's like, I will never struggle again to articulate my value to an organization. Right. Because a lot of times we have these careers, we've gone a deep domain expertise and it's hard for us to convey it. And then you have this way of communicating and saying, this is what I bring to the organization.
Yeah.
Well, I think the articulation is key, not just of what I do, but all those steps. Like again, a catalyst who's moving fast, and I know this is a lot of things you coach catalysts on, but isn't sharing out, isn't sharing the vision, the changes, the communication is where you're causing tension. And I 100% agree. The catalyst isn't broken; they're amazing, but the other person isn't broken either. The one who's getting frustrated if you're not communicating, right? And when you really go, oh. They don't see that. It's not like I remember my mom was talking about this in like high school. She like had this epiphany moment because she thought people just weren't sharing their creative ideas with her. She was a super creative woman. She was like, I don't know. And then she's like, and I realized that their brains didn't work that way. Like they didn't have that, right? I love brainstorming. And I remember distinctly in my career and I was like, oh, some people on my team really hate brainstorming. And it's not because they don't want to participate. They are wired different. And that, again, neither side is broken. Both can be great, but you have to really figure out how to make that work as a catalyst to be happy and be optimal, but also how to work within an organization.
So true.
I love that. And just to be clear, because I feel like some people think that we're advocating for everyone in a company should be a catalyst. We know that's
Tracey,
a
no.
No. So to your point, Rebecca, like you need all of the parts. It's just how do we help them develop the self-awareness and work together most effectively?
So I know, Tracey, you researched deep and you continue to research in this area of catalyst and how to like catalyze change. If I'm listening and I'm like, am I a catalyst? I think I am. Right? That feels like me. What are some of the research, other traits and aspects that you would be like, these are going to be kind of common ways?
I'll answer a slightly different question and kind of back into the research of if you're having the realization moment that you're a catalyst, what should you do? And you've already heard the three of us talking a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think they're both important, right? The first thing, if you're having that moment, is take this as a moment to take a deep breath, realize you're not alone, that you are perfect and beautiful in all the ways that you are, and taking the time to grow your self-awareness is going to be your biggest toolkit. So, go to our book, of course, right? Go and learn about yourself. Shannon and I, the book itself is Move Fast, Break Shit, Burnout, the Catalyst Guide to Working Well. When we talk about it as our love letter to Catalyst and our operating manual. And so that's, my first thing is go and read about yourself, understand the research to your point of what it is that really is the group that I'm a part of. The more we understand ourselves, the more we feel sane, the more we feel effective, the more we feel connected to other people, the less we burn out. So research I'll point to that'll be within the book that is going to be really helpful. I'll start with that last one is energy management, because catalysts are so driven by this external thing. And because our drive to do that is often unconscious, as Shannon said, I love that word. One of the places that we are also unconscious, that's a double whammy for us, is the impact on the work we do in the world on our energy. And the double whammy is that because our focus is out here and we're future focused and we want to make the world better, we almost never put our gaze internal. In fact, for many catalysts, it can feel counterintuitive because we feel so led to serve. And thinking about ourselves, especially in Western culture, where we think about self-care, people see this as a selfish act. And the research shows again and again that the cycles of burnout are regular and intense for catalysts. And they correlate to, we start on a new project, we're so excited, it gives us so much energy. We let go of a lot of our routine that allows us to maintain our energy. Then we get to this place, you'll see in the book that we talk about as orchestration, if the project moves forward, where instead of that front end of figuring things out and getting things in place and framing the problem and figuring out if it's a go, it's a go. And now I get to lead the charge, which is often what a product manager's job is going to be. But there's a fair number of folks in your audience that are like, the truth is, I hate that part. And I love the exciting front end of the problem. And so we really need a lot of energy management to be good at the orchestra conducting. If you're really bringing big change in an organization and you begin to be the lightning rod, there's a whole different level of energy zapping that begins to happen. This is when we begin to see people become really angry at us. It could be passive aggressive and we may begin to get gaslit. This is where instead of talking about the problem we're solving, people begin to talk about you as the problem. And then that has huge impacts on burnout moving into trauma. That's not every burnout cycle, but it's super common in the research. So as you gain your awareness catalysts, think a lot about yourself as the battery pack of change. Because if you're a burnt out catalyst, there is no change at all. It's not selfish. It is fundamental.
It's so interesting. I remember, gosh, every time I talk to you guys, I'm like, well, that's me too. But I remember realizing that whenever I'm burnt out, the person at fault is me, right? Like it was me. No one else was like, go faster, go faster. I was just like, I bet I could go faster. I bet I could do more. And to your point, in the beginning, it feeds you, right? This is not, you're not like, it's not a bad thing. This is me. And it's helping me feels like my purpose. And this is good. And this is good. And this is, oh my God, there's a cliff. And again, no one else was telling you to run, but in order to do the both,
just like the other thing I want to say is like the self-compassion piece on top of the rejuvenation, because it might not be for the reason that you think I was going to say, because even as authors of the book, Tracey and I have to remind ourselves about this all the time.
Yeah, totally.
So it's not like this is a one and done. And it's not like you're going to read the book and you're going to be the perfect catalyst and never burn out. That's not what we're saying. We're going to this is a life journey because it's who we are. It's how we show up. So just a lot of self-compassion for change is hard and changing ourselves is also hard.
Yeah. And we're always going to be pushing a little bit because that is also our happy place. That's and it's trying to find that balance.
Do I need to do it right now? Right? Like that's one of the questions.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's amazing. So one of the other things you guys talked about was activating catalysts, right? So it's like you have these like hidden agents in your organization. Oh, actually, yes, I want to talk about the hidden agents, but I actually do want to talk about some of the places you found those hidden agents, because I think, I still think people are going to be just naturally, because it's partly because it's who our listeners are. They're like, oh, Catalyst, they're awesome. And they look like me, right? And so they're thinking in those spaces, but I know that you guys have found catalysts in roles and in levels and positions and industries that people that may be a little bit different. Can we talk a little bit like about how that doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if they're in HR or if they're in product.
I'd say the most surprising places that we have come across catalysts, and this was early in my research. I remember someone who was a 20-year veteran in government, and I was like, what? Is that a place that they are?
That doesn't sound right.
In risk management, in sitting in finance, in financial institutions that have been around for decades, in insurance. So you're right in what you said earlier, that there's a higher incidence that we find of folks in tech companies, in design teams and innovation teams within tech companies or within any company, within startups, right? There's a place that the energy of a catalyst is going to be, but a catalyst is going to be anywhere. That's completely true. And so in the work we do to, Shannon talking about, and I'll turn it over to her to talk about activation, is that we help organizations find their catalysts because often they are hidden. Shannon, I love when she tells the story. I might turn it over to you to do it better, but there was a particular catalyst that was identified in a financial institution. Whereas we went through the cohort that we had created and the program we were doing with them, the leaders were like, that person, that's a surprise. I never would have thought of that. That person's so quiet. And then they're, processing it and like, oh, well, she has written a few books and, has a startup on the side and like, oh, right. And so, they're often in plain sight, but until we have invited them in safe ways, then they may not be the ones that you're, I think there's an assumption that all catalysts are kind of, Shannon and I show up in this very bubbly, outgoing, way. That is not every catalyst.
One of the reasons I love that like they're in HR and finance, and not only because I find it surprising and I think it's important. It's surprising because of my own personal bias. It shouldn't be as surprising as it is, right? But also because it's exciting. Like I think about the problems that I was trying to solve at different parts of my career, and I'm like, oh my God, if I had a catalyst partner on that side of the house, right, holy crud, right? Like it's great to have them in my department. Awesome. But to have them spread throughout is even better because the different perspectives, the things they can move differently, the systems they know, right? It's an entirely different effect than a whole bunch of us sitting on one side, right? That's just like, ooh, it's like a hive effect.
Some of the most impactful. So as catalysts, and there's a range of catalyticness, like I'm pretty far on the like highly intuitive, go. Tracey likes a little bit more data. So it's not like we all show up in the same way. But what I learned over the years was in order for me to be effective at my like crazy catalytic speed was I needed a bunch of support. So like having a VP of operations who could help take my ideas. And part of the reason that I hired Wayne Irwin, I love you forever. He came to me with this circle, and his circle was like half about the people and half about the processes. And so it's like and then, at another organization, I had like the best lawyer because we were doing all of this crazy new IP JVs and I needed a lawyer who could help me navigate those things, or a procurement person, because if I can't bring on vendors at speed, I can't get stuff done. Right. And so to your point, it's like they become the lifeline of making a catalytic culture successful. I totally agree.
Yeah. Okay. So now we can talk about I just want to forget that part about sort of activating them. So I'm an individual. I've got this, right? We think about understanding myself better. So I know how to get the most out of me in my organization, regardless. Like that's work I can do as an individual. As an organization, if I want to sort of, harness the power of those catalysts, I've got to find them and I've got to, as you call it, activate it. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, just for one other thing, we have a really easy quiz if people are interested on our website. So it's front and center. So if that feels like it'll be helpful for you, that's there.
That's the quiz to see whether or not I'm a catalyst, right? Like,
yes.
Okay. Yes. Go take the quiz. Report back your results.
One of the things I'm going to say, I want to make a comparison here too. There's a Venn diagram overlap, but we talk a lot about high potential people in orgs and like people wanting to keep the top talent, the retention. We have to do more with less. So we're looking at like who those like super performers are. Catalysts are non-traditional high potential people, which is why having these alternate ways of identifying them is so important. Particularly if they don't have the self-awareness. But even if we do, we can fall back into these patterns, which is we're not focused. We're so service-oriented, as Tracey said, that we're always in service of making the things around us better, often before people see them. So there's often not a KPI or a clear strategic objective. And what I'm working on may be in the bounds of that, but maybe this isn't the project that someone has an executive sponsor to. I'm working as a catalyst across the seams, across the silos. I'm getting so much done this way when most of the org is focusing on the impact in a vertical way that no one's seeing the impact that we're having. So this is why having alternate ways, and we are terrible often at managing up, again, which is something we have to teach catalysts to do because it gives you license and permission to, I'm not saying you need a big ego, but people need to know that you're getting stuff done, right? So the activating part has to start with the sort of the wide evangelization that we are interested in hearing from you, right? And so it has to go wide and far because oftentimes if we go back to the example of the person that Tracey was talking about, if we've experienced trauma, and here we also have to think about intersectionalities and how like trauma can also be amplified that way, we might be playing really small in our corner because we've not felt like it's safe over the years. And if that person gets seen and ignited by their organization, they are fans forever. A catalyst will follow a manager who understands them from team to team and company to company. So getting the message out as widely as possible and then letting people self-apply. You can't be voluntold to do this. So there's already a self-selection process. Then once the and we talked about the sort of attributes of finding the ones who are going to be more successful. The next thing is sort of two parts. One, giving the training and skills to the catalysts to help make them not the disruptor troublemakers, but the positive troublemakers. And they will, again, it's like such an insane retention tool because it just levels them up in ways they didn't know could be possible. They become so much more effective. The next part is helping the management understand what catalysts are and understand how to manage them. We go back to sort of the Project Aristotle within Google because Google spent a ton of time and money figuring out what makes great teams tick. And it turns out that what they landed on is great for everyone, but it's critical for catalysts, right? So like having the clarity, having a sense of psychological safety on the team, because we want to be able to speak the truth about what's really broken. You send us on an errand to create change and you don't like the answer. And so you come back and attack us, right? And so that's when the catalysts start shutting down. So there's a bunch of things that we can teach the managers to do. Another amazing thing that just increases the effectiveness and impact is connecting the catalysts across the organization. They will sort of naturally been doing this, but it's funny, no matter when we do these catalyst programs with organizations, we've done all of this, the executives have given them, some areas of opportunity to go explore. And let's be honest, in this environment, more often than not, they're being told to do the majority of that work in addition to their day job, which sounds like a terrible recipe. And we're not advocating for that, but that's just the reality. And so sometimes we have these check-ins because the worst things that we could do is go help them identify all this new top talent, ignite them, get them excited and have them burn out. Like we would never get hired again, right? That would be terrible. Right. And just the impact. But what they say to us when we check in with them, they're like, the highlight of my week is connecting with my catalyst peers and working on something that lights me up. And they're like, don't take that away from me. So those are the big things. And then for the managers, I would just say, like, if you're hearing this, do you think you have catalysts on your team? Check in with them, right? Like give them the air cover and let them know what that air cover looks like. Again, guardrails and have regular touch points and create that safe space. Also check in on our energy because we are likely to take on not just one project, but two projects in addition to our day job while we're doing things outside of work. And it won't feel comfortable for a lot of us to like wave the red flag and say, I really need to focus on this. It's going to be much more impactful for the organization than this thing right now. And And I think just always going back to help make sure that they're aligned to the strategy. Like that's where, to your point, Rebecca, they built it. We can chase a shiny object and we do it with good motivation, but we want to help them deliver value for the org.
It feels like a lot of what you guys talk about with Catalyst and with the organizations that they serve is really what you do is provide them sort of tools and frameworks for improving their communication and their intentionality both ways, right? Like an understanding. Catalysts need to understand themselves and that they're different, and the organization needs to understand. So you kind of educate about the differences. Then you provide some tools for them. And a lot of it is around better communicating so that all of this energy is in a really positive way. And not just communicating, but I know it's very data focused, right? Measurable items and measuring progress is both rewarding for the catalyst, but it helps the organization understand, right? So it's really just building, and it's more like a scaffolding, right? Because the organization and each is different, right? But it gives them something to build on.
So just taking a step back, if you go back to the name of the book, the Move Fast, Break Shit, Burnout, that's not what we're advocating. That's our default. What happens if we don't have the self-awareness and the tools and the processes that you're talking about, Rebecca? So the whole intention is to help us slow down just enough so that like we're moving at what might feel slower at the beginning, but is actually faster to get where you want to get, because you're leveraging those skills and tools that you were just talking about. We're helping people get clarity on the organizational appetite for change out of the get-go, right? Like I worked on Horizon 3 at Cisco. If they only wanted Horizon 1, it would have been a fool's errand. So like just making sure that you understand. Then the, breaking stuff, we're not saying you're not going to break stuff, but with the data that you're talking about and with the network map of my allies that I've like got the backing from and the air cover from, I can do that with an intentionality that then is giving everyone the data to iterate in the right way, which helps sort of minimize the burn, the spirals that we get into chasing the end thing, and then minimizes our burnout. We're not saying you can reduce burnout, but we can sort of minimize the amplitude and the frequency. But the other thing I love about what you said is it really is a scaffolding, because we also don't want to go in and introduce a whole bunch of new tools.
Right.
So like we say, hey, you need a network map. People asked us for a template. We created a template. But if you guys have something internally that looks like that, you could use an Excel spreadsheet. You could use a Miro board. We're super lightweight, because the goal is to embed this ability to activate and empower your catalyst and embed it into your DNA, not have it be this thing that this outside management consultant company did, and then it's done the second that we leave.
Right. It's amplifying what they have.
Yeah, what they have. That's a great way to say that. What are you in marketing, Rebecca? That was a great.
Maybe I should try. Okay. So we talked about lots of different things today. If you wanted listeners to do 2 things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would that be? And we'll start with Tracey.
Do we each get 1 or do we both get 2?
Oh, I think you both get 2.
Okay. Number 1, and this is for Catalyst in particular, or everyone in the audience?
Everyone in the audience.
Okay. Number 1, ask yourself the question, who are the catalysts around me? Me, others, my family, and just begin to think about this as a framework to identify. For everyone in the audience, catalyst and non-catalyst alike, we encourage you all the time to be checking into your own energy. It's something as humans, it is, burnout is a global phenomenon, especially 2020 on. And so checking in to see how are you doing and what is the impact of the daily activities I do to that energy level.
So I'll start with the catalyst specific one first, is maybe start by writing down a list of all of the things, all of the visions and all of the things that you're either actively working on or you've been holding yourself accountable to that you're not actively working on. To give yourself the permission to be like, there's a not right now list. There's no way that's humanly possible. And then for everything like Tracey, I would say self-compassion. Like it's tough times right now in the world sometimes. It's hard being a human. And so self-compassion.
Yes. Okay. as always, I love talking to you too. If other people wanted to learn more about Catalyst Constellations and the two of you and kind of the work, either helping them as a catalyst or helping their organizations tap into them, where should they go?
The book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burnout. The website, catalystconstellations.com. The podcast is a great place to learn about catalysts in the world. We talk to Catalyst executives about creating transformation in large organizations. And on LinkedIn, we post a lot about the work we do. So if you want to go and read and understand how we're helping individuals and organizations transform, go and see what we're talking about and become part of the conversation.
And reach out to us. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'd love to connect there.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Shannon and Tracey. Thanks for coming in today, kind of sharing your experience, sharing us the research and insights. It is an absolute pleasure having you.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
All right. That does it for today's episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.